Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution. And we got Egypt in America. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we got so much content I could have got into, but I say, you know what? Let's look deeper into this Egypt in America. Bunch of indigenous information we're going to be finding out about once again, looking back into. We was here way before Columbus ever thought of coming, and they don't want us digging into this so you can know thyself, know thy history.
In 1909, a shocking newspaper story claims an explorer found an ancient Egyptian city hidden deep in the Grand Canyon. Mummies, artifacts, and mysteries right in the heart.
I'll tell you something. When people usually debate certain things biblically, when people would say, well, you can't find this or you can't find that in certain locations, they used to say to disprove the story of the Bible, you know, and things of that nature. That may absolutely be because they absolutely looking in the wrong place. You will never find evidence when you looking in the goddamn wrong place. If you're in the wrong place, but if you look in the right place, then your historical evidence might start adding up to bring some factual credibility to a lot of different stories.
Heart of America. Even the Smithsonian Institution got involved. And just as quickly, the Smithsonian said, never happened, and stonewalled anyone who asked questions. And the explorer, well, he was never heard from again. Welcome to the In-Between. I'm Carol Ann, and today we are exploring the deep, dark recesses of the legend cover-up of Concaid's Cave. March 12th, 1909. A small blurb is printed in the Friday evening edition of the Arizona Gazette newspaper. It pretty much just says that this guy named G.E. Concaid from Lewiston, Idaho, took a boat down from Green River, Wyoming, where he started in October, to Yuma, Arizona. That's almost 1,500 miles of river. Pretty impressive. And it says he's only the second man to make the trip. After a brief mention of Mr. Concaid unearthing some interesting archaeological discoveries, the article states that other than losing an oar along the way, he enjoyed the trip so much he wants to do it again next winter with friends. But on April 5th, 1909, the avid Gazette readers would see a follow-up article that's a little more in-depth. Turns out there's a little more to the story. Now, just a note here that since these articles are published only about 3 weeks apart, I am assuming that they are talking about the same trip, since I think it's highly unlikely that Mr. Concaid could have traveled back up the Colorado River to the east end of the Grand Canyon and floated his way back down to Yuma again in that time frame. It's not like going down the water slide and running back to get in line for another run. The second, more detailed version of the trip goes something like this. G.E.'s trip is not just for the fun of it. He's actually on a mineral prospecting tour. So as he's floating along, he's continually scanning the sides of the river canyons for a sign of mineral deposits. Floating his way through Marble Canyon, which is toward the east end of the 270-mile-long Grand Canyon, he spies a change in the rock coloration that could signal an area of mineral deposits. So he stops his boat, climbs out, and starts making his way up the 2,000 feet to where he saw the change in the rock. As he gets higher, he discovers some steps that have been chiseled into the rock. That's a bit unexpected. He keeps climbing until he comes up to the entrance of a cave. Chisel marks on the inside cave walls pique his curiosity. He's not sure what to expect, so he draws his gun and goes in.
During that trip, I went back several hundred feet along the main passage till I came to the crypt in which I discovered the mummies. One of these I stood up and photographed by flashlight.
The main passageway is about 12 feet wide, narrowing down to 9 feet toward the far end. About 57 feet in from the entrance, he finds the first set of these side passages that go off to the right and the left. And off of those side passages are a bunch of rooms about the size of a living room, but some are as big as 30 by 40 feet. And these passages are as straight as any modern engineer could build. But that's not all.
Over 100 feet from the entrance is the cross hall, several hundred feet long, in which are found the idol or image of the people's god, sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower or lily in each hand. The cast of the face is oriental, and the carving this cavern. The idol almost resembles Buddha, though the scientists are not certain as to what religious worship it represents. Taking into consideration everything found thus far, it is possible that this worship most resembles the ancient people of Tibet.
He found enameled and glazed pottery, and vases and urns and cups made of copper and gold. He found what looked to be granaries 12 feet high that you could only enter from above with copper hooks on the edges so you could lower a ladder. And they still had seeds in them. He found some kind of gray metal similar to platinum and rooms that had remnants of what looked to be the metal smelting process. Now keep in mind, those cups and urns made of copper and gold and the gray metal as well, those things would have had to have been smelted for them to take those shapes. Copper smelting started in the Fertile Crescent civilizations around 5000 BC, but wasn't a thing in the Americas until the European settlers brought that technology with them in the 17th century. Yet, Mr. Concaid also finds weapons, sharp-edged and hard as steel.
The tomb or crypt in which the mummies were found is one of the largest of the chambers, the walls slanting back at an angle of about 35 degrees. On these are tiers of mummies, each one occupying a separate hewn shelf. At the head of each is a small bench, on which is found copper cups and pieces of broken swords. Some of the mummies are covered with clay, and all are wrapped in a bark fabric.
And interestingly enough, the cups and stuff that are sitting in front of the mummies toward the bottom are simple and kind of crude, for lack of a better term. But as the rows get higher, the items get more refined, like their skills at metalsmithing are getting better over time. Also, all of the mummies are men, no women or children in this particular section, leading GE to speculate that these must have been the warriors, the protectors of the other inhabitants. Another room he finds measures 40 feet wide by 700 feet long. The only thing that's in it are tools that look like cooking utensils, leading him to guess that maybe it was a giant dining hall. That's a big dining hall. Then he finds another huge chamber that turns out to be like the hub of a wheel, a central point from which radiate tons more passageways. By the time he's done, GE estimates that he has discovered several hundred rooms. Given the massive size of this network of caverns, Mr. Concaid estimates that upwards of 50,000 people could have lived comfortably in this cliffside condo complex. But with all of these discoveries, he does not find any animal bones or animal skins or any other kind of clothing or bedding that would give him any kind of clue as to who these people were. If only they had written something down. They did. Too bad we can't read it.
On all the urns or walls over doorways and tablets of stone which were found by the image are the mysterious hieroglyphics, the key to which the Smithsonian Institute hopes yet to discover. The engraving on the tables probably has something to do with the religion of the people. Similar hieroglyphics have been found in southern Arizona.
Interestingly enough, walking through hundreds of feet of dark passageways and finding large rooms filled with dead people, none of that seemed to bother GE, except one dark, unventilated room.
There is one chamber of the passageway to which is not ventilated, and when we approached it, a deadly, snaky smell struck us. Our light would not penetrate the gloom, and until stronger ones are available, we will not know what the chamber contains. Some say snakes, but others boo-hoo this idea and think it may contain a deadly gas or chemicals used by the ancients.
They don't hear anything. For some odd reason, whatever light he had didn't seem to want to penetrate the darkness of that particular room. Having no canary to send into the coal mine, as it were, he decided to leave this one room alone, noting that the entire place felt very heavy and creepy. So after wandering around and checking things out for Lord knows how long, Mr. Concaid takes a bunch of pictures, gathers up some of the more interesting artifacts, loads them on his boat, and keeps on trucking down the river.
I gathered a number of relics which I carried down the Colorado to Yuma, from whence I shipped them to Washington with details of the discovery.
And the people at the Smithsonian in Washington must be mighty impressed by what GE sends them, because they immediately make plans under the direction of Professor S.A. Jordan to send down another 30 or 40 people to explore the caverns even further. And as you would expect from any operation that includes any aspect of the government, the article in the Gazette also includes a very firm statement from Mr. Concaid.
First, I would impress that the cavern is nearly inaccessible. The entrance is 1,486 feet down the sheer canyon wall. It is located on government land, and no visitor will be allowed there under penalty of trespass. The scientists wish to work unmolested, without fear of archaeological discoveries being disturbed by curio or relic hunters. A trip there would be fruitless, and the visitor would be sent on his way.
So we're having a party, and you're not invited. And guess what? That cave party is still going on, and you're still not invited. Fun fact, of the 270 miles of the Grand Canyon, only 120 of it has been explored for possible caves. And of that 120 miles, there are upwards of 1,000 caves. But of that 1,000 caves, only 30 have been really explored and mapped. One of those caves is 40 miles deep. That tells me
That's crazy.
We have a whole lot of exploring to do. Who knows what we may find? We already have found evidence of another unknown group of cave dwellers that are being called the stick people, because they left behind these little stick people of all different sizes that have been carbon dated to at least 3,000 years old. So who knows what else has been sitting there waiting to be discovered? And many of these caves that have been mapped are now fitted with bars at the entrance so no one can get in. Supposedly, this is a measure to protect the habitat of different bats. I don't know about you, but I think bats are doing okay for themselves in the world. But, lest I be too dismissive, I looked it up. There are only 2 bat species in the entire American Southwest that are on the endangered species list: the Mexican long-nosed bat and the lesser long-nosed bat. Well, that name's kind of a self-esteem killer. The Mexican long-nosed bat lives in the Southwest, but not near the Grand Canyon. And the lesser long-nosed bat, which does live around the Grand Canyon, has made a comeback and is about to be taken off the endangered species list. So I think the bats got this. Why go to such great lengths to protect bat caves that are basically inaccessible anyway for bats that don't need protecting? Which brings me to my next question. If the cave is there, why has no one else found it yet? Answer: because it's basically inaccessible. Seems like it shouldn't be hard. If one person found it, then by now, someone else should have too. However, consider that scaling down the walls of the canyon at that point is almost impossible. Water is very heavy to carry with you when you're climbing, so you're not going to carry that much of it. So by the time you get down far enough to get to the height that the cave is supposed to be at, you're already out of water. Now, I would have thought that anyone looking for the cave would go by boat, just like Concaid did. But now, to go down that section of the river requires winning the lottery. Literally. They have a lottery drawing each year to hand out permits for anyone wanting to make the trip. And it could take years before your name comes up. And it's not a short trip. It takes days just to get to that section of the canyon where the cave is supposed to be. Then it can take weeks to traverse the rest of the river because there is no other place to get out for hundreds of miles. Not to mention that you must be certified for Class 5 rapids because the river gets a little crazy along the way. All that to say that getting there by boat is not as easy as it sounds. Now, there are a couple of guys named Rex Bear from leakproject.com and Jared Murphy from notaliens.com who've been studying the area looking for the cave for a while now. And on one of their trips, they start out with 2 cars, leaving one in a public parking lot and loading all of their gear into their super duper 4-wheel drive Jeep. Because out in this area, there are no real roads, so you can only get around with a 4-wheel drive vehicle. And they're out there just poking around, seeing what they can see in the area right over the area that the cave is supposed to be in. One of the things that they have is a camera with a super telephoto lens. And what do they spy? A black Apache helicopter with gun turrets looking their way. Okay, interesting and duly noted. At the end of the day, they get back to the parking lot and pick up their other car. And there are 3 frat boy looking dudes in khakis all standing around a car pretending to be on their phones. All 3 of them keep throwing glances at Rex and Jared while they're unloading their gear. Then Rex and Jared look like they're getting ready to go, and the 3 frat boys start getting ready to go. But Rex and Jared don't go. So the frat boys don't go. These 3 guys hang out until Jared and Rex finally leave the parking lot. And they said these guys were so obvious, it was laughable. But why? Jared rolled out a theory that maybe it has something to do with the uranium in the area. Did you know that there are over 500 open uranium mining permits for the Grand Canyon area? But what exactly do they think is going to happen? 2 guys with backpacks full of snacks and water and a really big camera are going to go dig a hole with their bare hands and find a big old nugget of uranium? I don't think it works that way. But between the helicopter surveillance and the stooges who drew the short straws in the parking lot, it's pretty obvious that the government is still protecting something. Now, I wish I could say that's the end of the story, but you know that we here at The In-Between always have to look at the flip side of the coin, whether we like it or not. And I gotta say, I don't like the other side of this coin, mostly because of one man, Joe Mulhatton. See, as I was looking for any other follow-up newspaper articles on G.E. Concaid, I found this story from the Coconino Sun on April 16th, 1909.
The reported discovery of a mammoth underground city of an ancient race in the Grand Canyon seems to be a splendid piece of imagination sent out by some Mulhattonized individual.
Well, what does that mean, to be Mulhattonized? So, of course, I had to look it up. And I gotta tell you, I'm starting to fall more and more in love with history every day. Fun tangent. To be Mulhattonized is to fall under the influence of the aforementioned Joe Mulhatton. Who's Joe Mulhatton? One of the greatest hoaxers to have ever lived. Joe was a hardware salesman, kind of guy that would give you the shirt off his back and that everybody loved. But evidently, hardware sales aren't exciting enough because his favorite pastime for over 40 years was tricking newspapers into printing his fantastical stories as real news events, just for the fun of it. Starting around 1870 and going all the way through the early 1900s, Joe would send stories into newspapers with tall tales, including stories like George Washington's body is now petrified, or a little girl who tied a bunch of helium balloons around her waist and floated up into the sky, only to be saved by a sharpshooter who popped the balloons one by one until she came safely back to the ground. Or my personal favorite, the magnetic cactus that had enough pull to attract everything from lizards to cowboys impale them on its cactus spikes, and quickly dissolve the bodies with its digestive juices. In 1883, when Joe was just getting started, the American Antiquarian and Oriental Journal thought it prudent to issue a warning to archaeologists.
Joe Mulhatton is a character of some interest to archaeologists. His residence is in Kentucky, and his business is to invent marvelous stories or lies. He has invented 7 stories about finding big caves, Masonic emblems, and other ridiculous things.
In 1888, Joe Mulhatton was included in the Book of Prominent Men and Women of the Day, alongside Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, and Oscar Wilde. In 1891, the New York Times declared,
Joe Mulhatton is known in every city in the United States and has probably caused more trouble in newspaper offices than any other man in the country. His wild stories, written in the most plausible style, have more than once caused the special correspondents of the progressive journals of the United States to hurry from coast to coast to investigate some wonderful occurrence which only existed in the imagination of the great liar.
This guy was so prolific and well-known that according to the Museum of Hoaxes,
during the 1870s and 1880s, Joseph Mulhatton was perhaps the most famous hoaxer in America.
And what were his favorite and most famous kind of stories to tell? Ones about discoveries of caves full of amazing artifacts of great archaeological significance from ancient civilizations. He has been described as a burlesquer of facts, or as his friends would call him, a liar.
Most artistic, beautiful, and consistent liar ever turned loose on a nation.
In 1910, the year after the Arizona Gazette published the Egyptian cave story, it also published a fond tribute to Mulhatton and his talents, regaling many of his bigger whoppers. However, it did not mention the Egyptian cave story of just the year before. Now, with all that being said, I did not find anywhere that good old Joe went so far as to set up the long cons, so to speak. And remember that the Gazette actually ran 2 stories on G.E. Concaid. So while it could very well be a Mulhatton setup, a 1-2 punch wasn't exactly his MO. Over the years, the legend of the lost Egyptian city within the Grand Canyon continued to grow, and more people started to investigate. Peter Hay of the website sightings.com sent a letter to the Smithsonian asking if they had any records relating to the story. The response he got back?
The Smithsonian's Department of Anthropology has searched its files without finding any mention of a Professor Jordan, Concaid, or a lost Egyptian civilization in Arizona.
Big surprise, right? Okay, except that's not true. First of all, I find it extremely hard to believe that in over 100 years of existence that they have never employed anyone named Concaid. Second of all, they did employ a Professor Jordan, just not an S.A. Jordan. They actually had a 30-year relationship with one David Starr Jordan, known not only as the father of ichthyology, the study of fish, but also as a founder of Stanford University. They knew this guy so well that they offered him the jobs of National Museum Director and Smithsonian Secretary more than once. Not to mention that he had been on expeditions down the Colorado River before in 1889 with one T. Concaid, a trip about which Jordan himself published many articles. So why not mention this guy? Well, they may not want to call too much attention to that relationship, considering that David Starr Jordan turned out to be a racist eugenicist who helped cover up a murder in Hawaii. Ooh. Didn't really see that one coming. So we have a T. Concaid versus a G.E. Concaid, and a D.S. Jordan versus an S.A. Jordan. Interesting coincidence. Almost too coincidental. Is it possible that maybe the newspaper just got the initials wrong? Maybe. Or maybe good old Joe Mulhatton remembered reading the articles written by D.S. Jordan a few years earlier and just use those names to give more credibility to his hoax. Unfortunately, that's a possibility as well. Another thing that the proponents of the legend often point to as corroborating evidence is that many of the landmarks in the area carry Egyptian names, such as the Isis Temple, the Osiris Temple, and the Tower of Ra. And I gotta admit, it kind of had me raising my eyebrow at first too. However, a lot of those monuments were named by a guy named John Wesley Powell, who went through the canyon in 1869 and 1872 on geological expeditions. And just for extra context, people in America were in the middle of an Egyptology craze right around that time. And Powell didn't just use Egyptian names. He also named things for other cultures, like the Venus, Vishnu, and Zoroaster temples. And this last point on the not true side of the ledger, it's just my own personal observation after looking at all of the maps and the pictures and stuff. The spot where the article says this cave is supposed to be in Marble Canyon is at a spot where the distance from the top of the canyon to the canyon floor is somewhere around 3,500 feet. So G.E. Concaid would have had to climb from the canyon floor up 2,000 feet. Well, here are some pictures of that exact area from Rex and Jared and their super duper telephoto lens camera. Looking at the walls of the canyon, I just find it really hard to believe that a 2,000-foot climb is even possible without tons of climbing gear. Now, maybe since Concaid was using this trip as a prospecting trip, maybe he had that kind of gear on him. But it takes a whole lot of rope to climb 2,000 feet. But I guess it's possible. But even with all of this information, I still have one more question. Given the massive size of the network of caverns, Mr. Concaid estimates that upwards of 50,000 people could have lived there comfortably. So where did these people go? Maybe they're still here. It is a Hopi Indian legend that their ancestors once lived in an underworld in the Grand Canyon until fighting broke out between the good and the bad, the people of one heart and the people of two hearts. Machado, the chief of the good people of one heart, told his people, "We have to leave the underworld." But there was no way out. The chief then caused a tree to grow up and pierce the roof of the underworld. So the people of one heart climbed out. They lived and worked on the Colorado River and grew grain and corn. They sent out a messenger to the Temple of the Sun, asking the blessing of peace, goodwill, and rain for the people of one heart. That messenger never returned. But when he does, their lands and ancient dwelling place will be restored to them. So to this day, the old men of the Hopi tribe can be seen at sundown, standing on top of their houses, looking toward the sun, watching and waiting for that messenger to return.
This video was originally banned by YouTube, so I re-edited the video. Hopefully, it won't get banned.
And you deal with it.
They can't stop it. No matter what they do, they can't stop it. Lex. They can't stop it. Lex. Nah. They can't stop it. Yeah. We ain't build no slave ship. We ain't make those anchors. We ain't plot those grave sites. Up since daylight, burdened by the things we try to make right. It's gonna be a late night. So much turmoil makes my blood boil. Kundalini, encore. Earth is sunbroad. Dirt is unsoiled. With one chord, tell a story that some spoil. Watch it unfold. Stories untold. Copyright unsold. Books with one spine. Ghosts with one soul. They want control. You want control. But we share one goal. We fight one foe. Set your front door. And it keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking. Yeah. It keeps knocking, but the people kept rocking. Yeah. Flex. Whatever they do. They can't stop it. Keeps knocking. Yeah, yeah. They can't stop us. No, nah. They can't stop us. No, they can't stop us.
Mitzraim, Tameri, the land first mentioned in Genesis as the place where Abram and Sarai sojourned when there was a famine in the land. Genesis 12:9 and 10 indicate the journey is traveled toward the south, as well as the location of Egypt relative to Canaan after the death of Terah. Verse 10 states, down into Egypt, which is an indication that Egypt possibly lies at a lower elevation. If not, then quite possibly the word down could be synonymous with south. However, the root meaning of Taman, south in Hebrew, means to the right. Nevertheless, from the south of Canaan, they were to travel into Egypt. According to Jasher, around the same time, Rikion becomes pharaoh by enacting a tax from the dead. We also know the custom of the land at the time was that the king would only be seen once per year in the public forum. And this was the only day to bring grievances to him. When it came to Abram, he passed off Sarai, his wife, as his sister because of her extreme beauty. The Aramaic Targum translation suggests that Abram had not fully beheld Sarai until she undressed to cross the river into Egypt. As it seems, Abram is actually rewarded for his deception towards Pharaoh in saying Sarai is his sister. But was he really being deceptive? Remember, Terah is Abram and Sarai's father. So technically, Sarai is his half-sister. The result of Abram being Sarai's brother caused him to obtain riches under the favor of Pharaoh. But conversely, Pharaoh was cursed as a result of taking another man's wife. All of these things he acquired under Pharaoh, who the book of Jasher says was Rikion at the time. Mitzraim was supposedly a place of well-built civilization, whose story of exactly how and when it was founded gets lost in context. By the time of Abram in Genesis 12, the Tower of Babel had been destroyed and men had been scattered upon the face of the earth, just before in Genesis 11. We also know that the lands were divided in the days of Peleg after the tower. So in this same context, we know that wherever Mitzraim is located, its civilization is already established, with very little detail mentioned prior to Genesis 12, describing the historical foundations of such civilization. If we just take the roles of Pharaoh, which many sources make synonymous with the king of Egypt, but we know began with taxing the dead, we can see the role of Pharaoh change from Genesis to Exodus. In both instances of Abram and Joseph, Pharaoh doesn't act as an oppressor until after the death of Joseph. Then does a different Pharaoh become the face of oppression. We begin to see this during the life of Moses, in which the role of Pharaoh becomes the oppressor, synonymous with Mitzraim or Egypt. But what about the land of Mitzraim or Egypt, as it is called in the King James Version? What clues in Scripture can give us a definitive description of Egypt? The Nile is a stream, not a specific river, but the river of today is a river that many people think is somehow mentioned as a specific river in the Bible. It is not. The Nile is a Greek translation that changed the word Nile into a proper noun, in which it is abundantly clear it is not. In occasion after occasion, the word Nile was changed from its true form and meaning. An initial mention of a river associated with Egypt in Genesis is in Genesis 15:18, when Abram is given through covenant the land in its most simple context, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, neither of which is the Nile, because, as we have already established, the Nile is an improper noun. Again, we look at Isaiah chapter 19 in multiple translations and contexts. The mouth of the Nile is the Egyptian Sea. This major contradiction in biblical geography cannot be explained away by just changing the root meaning of the word Nile from an improper noun to a proper noun. Any biblical scholar will tell you that this is the same river mentioned by name throughout the Greek translations of Scripture, but that same scholar cannot properly reconcile the problem with its literal inconsistencies. Most biblical scholars put the Sea of Egypt as the Red Sea. In doing this, they must be creative in order to make these landmarks fit into their proposed geographical templates. What ultimately happens is the truth spirals down the open air latrine of heathenistic nonsense. In order for this nonsense to fit their templates, words, names, and meanings must be translated completely out of context. For example, if most academic scholars put the Egyptian Sea as the Red Sea, then where is the Red Sea? How does one account for that? Even by naming the sea different names, one is still left with a major hole in their theory. The mouth of the Nile isn't at the Red Sea either. So whichever body of water they use to indicate as the Egyptian Sea, neither fits. More evidence, their information is manufactured to promote false geography. The mouth of the Nile is the Mediterranean Sea, which is represented by neither the Red Sea or the Mediterranean. According to scholars, the Mediterranean Sea was labeled as the Great Sea, recognized as the largest body of water on Earth. This is the central part of their deception, the world map. The only existing manuscripts remaining from anything chronologically close to antiquity are products manipulated and refabricated from the hands of Greco-Roman families. Why would classical Egyptian history only be explored and taught through the lens of non-Egyptians? Or were these Greco-Romans also Egyptians as well? To understand this, we must work backwards, starting with present day and showing the direct correlation from the past to the present. In order to do this, we will begin with the field of Egyptology and the gatekeepers who uphold the status quo.
Welcome to the greatest gate of 2020. There's more room. You ready?
The narrative concerning Egypt sits mostly under the hands of Europeans and Freemasons, specifically the French, followed by the British and the Germans. But why do these people control all the information about a people's history for whom they are seemingly unrelated to? The Louvre in Paris and the British Museum control the Chronicle. And what reason would these nations have to create a manufactured story about Egyptian history? And furthermore, how is it that the French became the leading experts in ancient Egyptian history rather than Egyptians themselves? And why did the top Egyptologists study in America and Europe rather than exclusively in Egypt? At what point in time did prophecy become present? And at what point did the conqueror's fairy tale become fact? According to the historical narrative, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt in 1798 as an offensive against British India, apparently to stop British trade access to India. British India wasn't an actual sovereign nation which operated and controlled Egypt. British India could only best be described as merchants whom had set up trading posts, most predominantly the East India Company, were accompanied by forts on land which had been acquired by force or by simply squatting on uninhabited plots of land along navigable waterways. Jacques Cartier was one of the first French explorers to do this in America, navigating down the St. Lawrence Seaway. But this point cannot be overlooked. The most notable French explorer, Napoleon, his expedition and invasion of Europe happened at the exact same time as the Louisiana Purchase. The course of these parallel events occurred during Napoleon's Battle of the Nile against the British. Coincidentally, the French were also battling the British for control west of the Mississippi in the exact same narrative and fashion in which Napoleon obtained vast plots of land in America. So a serious question should be asked. How did Napoleon acquire ownership of vast lands in Middle America while at the same time he was invading Egypt. All right, guys, I'm going to be reading an article that is entitled, "Why Did So Much of Napoleon's Family Come to America?" Few things are closely linked as the Bonapartes in France, but the famed emperor's family also had strong connections across the Atlantic. No fewer than 5 of Napoleon's 7 siblings, and very nearly the little corporal himself, either lived in the United States or had children who did, generally sharing Napoleon's restless ambition, military prowess, and knack for drama. These American Bonapartes even included a member of President Teddy Roosevelt's cabinet. Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome's in the house. The youngest sibling of Napoleon became the first Bonaparte to step foot in America in 1803, the same year his brother nearly doubled the size of the United States by authorizing the Louisiana Purchase. Wow. Amazing. At a party in Baltimore shortly after his arrival, Jerome danced with Betsy Patterson. Who the Betsy Patterson? The daughter of a prosperous local merchant. Okay, all right. You know about the merchants, Ezekiel. Sparks apparently flew when his naval uniform hooked into her gown, and they wed that December, much to the chagrin of Napoleon, who annulled the marriage and refused to let a pregnant Betsy disembark when the couple sailed to Europe in 1805. Wow. That naval button hook. Napoleon's a hater for that, by the way. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know the deal is with Betsy Patterson. We're going to look her up. She might not know shit. Protest notwithstanding, Jerome acquiesced to Napoleon's demands. Okay, so he's dutifully marrying a princess and serving as king of Westphalia in present-day Germany. Okay, that's not France. Okay, doing his thing. All they do is marry princesses around her. Betsy, meanwhile, returned to Baltimore with an annual pension of 60,000 francs. Okay, I mean, 60,000 francs. You can live off that today, I think. I don't know. What's the exchange rate on francs? A substantial sum at the time, apparently, I would think. Cut off from the Bonapartes, she nonetheless continued regarding herself as essentially royalty, even telling her son with Jerome that he should never degrade himself by marrying an American. Well darn, Betsy. Well darn. Alas, their son did marry an American. Ha! In your face, Betsy. He had 2 children of his own. The oldest, Jerome Napoleon Bonaparte II. Does that mean he's the second Jerome or the second Napoleon? Yeah, the second Jerome. Yeah, okay. Served in the U.S. and French militaries, whereas the youngest, Charles Joseph Bonaparte, a lawyer, joined the presidential cabinet of Theodore Roosevelt as Secretary of the Navy. Okay. And then as the Attorney General, he gained a reputation as a trust buster and a supporter of African American rights. Okay. And he also established a force of special agents that would become the FBI. Oh, yeah. All right. He's a supporter of African American rights and also established the FBI. That makes more sense. Complete sense. Jerome and Betsy's line of American descendants would last for just one more generation. Their sole grandson died childless in 1945 after fatally tripping over the leash of his wife's dog in New York City's Central Park. Hold on. After fatally tripping over the leash of his wife's dog in New York City's Central Park. How frail do you have to be to die after tripping over the leash of a dog? Was it? All right. Got a lot of questions here, but R.I.P. Jerome Bonaparte. Romy Rome.
They killed him.
Their only great-granddaughter, on the other hand, married a Danish count and purportedly raised her children overseas. Joseph Bonaparte. Napoleon's oldest sibling, Joseph, went Caucasian after following his brother's downfall and escaped to the United States. In the summer of 1815, after briefly living in Philly, he bought Point Breeze, a massive estate on the banks of the Delaware River in Bordenton, New Jersey. Flush with cash, particularly once his secretary retrieved a box of buried treasure from Switzerland. Okay. These niggas is always coming up on treasures. He also purchased an even bigger property in upstate New York with a lake at its center, now called Lake Bonaparte. Can we look up Lake Bonaparte? Anybody been out there? Anybody ever been to Lake Bonaparte? At Point Breeze, Joseph housed an immense collection of artwork, furniture, and books, as well as royal jewels from Spain, where he had been king from 808 to 813. That's 1808 to 1813. His library was the largest in the USA, says Monroe Price, a professor of international history at Bradford University in England and author of Napoleon, The End of Glory. It was 8,000 volumes, and the Library of Congress at that point was 6,500 volumes. So this is very interesting here. I just want to stay on this point that a member of Napoleon's family had 8,000 volumes and the Library of Congress had 6,500. Okay. So for any of you who do serious research, you understand that the Library of Congress is a huge resource for us who want to seek old information. When you want to look at a book from the 1800s and you don't want to pay $1,800 for it, you go to the Library of Congress because there's a chance that they may have it and it's free to look at. So,
yeah, the only reason they had them because they was conquering the world and they was raiding the libraries all over the world. Same thing Alexander did. That's what they always did. You see, steal all of our sacred knowledge, call it their library. They already went raided the libraries of Mali, go to Tibet. You see, then come raid the mighty libraries in the Americas. This is what these invaders were doing.
The Napoleon family member at Point Breeze is that Joseph Bonaparte. Joseph Bonaparte has a library that's bigger than the Library of the Congress. All right. I just want to put that into perspective. Similar to how we would say Caesar stole all of these volumes from the Library of Alexandria. You know, the same Alexandria that Napoleon captured. Charming and refined, Joseph purportedly got along well with local townspeople who helped save his valuables when a fire rushed through the estate in 1820. Wow, those townspeople are heroes. At the same time, he hosted a steady stream of Napoleonic exiles and dignitaries, such as Revolutionary War hero Marquise de Lafayette and future First Lady Louisa Adams. Some evidence suggests Joseph may have even declined an offer to sit on the throne of Mexico, which was then seeking independence from Spain. Wow. You've never heard about Joseph Bonaparte, but he obviously was the man. He was about to be the first fresh He was about to be I don't know the first, I don't know. I don't really know Mexican history like that, but I think he was about to be the first French Mexican president, which would have been crazy for 1820. A French Mexican president. You see how these countries are trading lands? You see what's going on here? For 100 years, the French controlled that area in the middle of America, and Napoleon goes to Egypt, and all of a sudden, he gains all of this land after he wins in Egypt, but eventually he loses in Egypt and has to sell the land. After Napoleon's death in 1821, the Allied European powers loosened travel restrictions on the Bonaparte family, promoting several members to set off for the year, sir, with Point Breeze as the usual first point of call. Joseph's two daughters, though not his wife, arrived in 1821 and 1823, and he soon arrived, had American-born grandchildren running around the estate. Various nephews came as well. Okay. We're going to skip Joseph. Oh, Lucien Bonaparte. As with Jerome, Napoleon strongly disapproved of his younger sibling Lucien's choice of a bride. But unlike Jerome, Lucien stuck with his wife, preferring to live with her in self-imposed exile rather than become a monarch like his brothers. Oh, love over power. Lucien Bonaparte. History, y'all. In 1810, Lucien and his family set sail for the United States, only to be intercepted by a British warship and brought to England, where he was forced to remain until Napoleon's first abdication. After Waterloo, Lucien tried again to reach the United States, but the European powers refused to grant him the necessary passports. Okay, so did he make it? I really don't want to keep okay, that's only one paragraph. Lucien ended up living out his days in present day Italy. Although he never made it to America, at least two of his children did. One son, Charles Lucien, married Joseph's granddaughter, Zenaide. Charles Lucien married Joseph's granddaughter, Zenaide. And the couple spent about 5 years at Point Breeze, where the great library is. Considering one of the perennial, ornithologists of the 19th century, Charles Lucien published a 4-volume work on American birds and befriended John James Audubon, a fellow American of French descent. Another of Lucien's sons, Pierre, also visited Point Breeze, as well as New York City, where he gained a reputation for rowdiness and once reportedly stabbed a dog. Okay, that's cool. Or, what did the dog do? If the dog tried to attack him and he stabbed the dog, then, I understand. You got to take a dog out. But if he just savagely stabbed a dog, then for no reason, he's got to... I don't want to continue with this story. All right. Pierre would later shoot a journalist to death in Paris. He shot a journalist to death in Paris. All right. Pierre Bonaparte, y'all. Louis Bonaparte. Like his brother Lucien, Louis went to Italy post Waterloo and never visited the United States. Okay, so we don't care about him. He never went. Now we got Caroline Bonaparte. Napoleon's youngest sister, Caroline, married one of his top cavalry officers, Joachim Murat, or Joachim Murat. During the height of Napoleon's powers, the pair ruled as king and queen of Naples, and they eventually broke with Napoleon in a futile attempt to keep their throne. After Waterloo, Murat was executed and Caroline was exiled to Austria. Both their sons, meanwhile, went to the United States. Arriving in 1823, Achille Marat would spend most of his adult life in Florida. Okay, so he was in Florida, where he fought in the Second Seminole War, married George Washington's great-grandniece, purchased dozens of slaves, and engaged in a number of quixotic business schemes. A hothead and an eccentric, he apparently hated bathing and once lost the tip of his finger in a duel. This is the Bonaparte line, guys. Napoleon Bonaparte. After Waterloo, Napoleon's French base of support evaporated and foreign armies rapidly closed in on Paris. Knowing that his enemies would kill or imprison him, the abdicated emperor himself turned his sights to America. The U.S. was a safe haven. Ideologically and practically, Price says, it's clear he would have had a positive reception. In addition to applying for passports to the United States, Napoleon began studying the geography and ecology of the New World and reputedly plotted to smuggle millions of francs. He then fled to the French Atlantic coast, where ships awaited to take him to America. After dithering for days, however, Napoleon ultimately surrendered himself to the British, who were blockading the coast rather than chance a humiliating capture. Napoleon's genes wound up in America anyway. The fallen emperor's illegitimate son, Charles Leon de Noël, had a son who purportedly joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. This is by Jesse Greenspan and History.com.
Something amazing happens in the Cairo desert at the foot of the Great Pyramid. What we believe to be the world's first archaeological dig is established. There are scholars from a wide range of disciplines. Architects, surveyors, and others studying the Great Pyramid, first of all measuring it.
According to the top Egyptologists, the pyramids were built over 4,000 years ago using the metric system. But according to the world historical narrative, the metric system was discovered by the French in 1798, the same year Napoleon invaded Egypt. Do we assume that this unit of measurement was lost and never used again for 4,000 years? Or did the French rediscover the system and take credit for the creation? Nonetheless, the chronological and historical parallels between Napoleon's invasion of Egypt and the French and British participation of the Louisiana Purchase are undeniable. One of the most important supposed discoveries of Napoleon's invasion was the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. Some historians say this is what the entire field of Egyptology is set upon. However, today the stone sits in London at the British Museum because the French eventually lost to the British in 1801 at the capitulation of Alexandria, and the British took the stone along with other relics and possessed them unto this day. What are the chances that the British and the French are being truthful about Egyptian history. According to the historical narrative, 3 types of script are found on the giant Rosetta Stone: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Until this point, no one could even understand Egyptian hieroglyphic. The stone reads Ptolemy as the acting pharaoh during the commission of the rock, making this stone Ptolemaic in origin, thus not authentically Egyptian. The Ptolemies were not Egyptian, they were Greek. This family came into power after the death of Alexander and the subsequent division of his kingdom. As mentioned earlier, the Seleucid kingdom reigned in Syria, and the Ptolemaic kingdom ruled Egypt. The Seleucids were kings of the north, and the Ptolemies were the kings of the south. Egypt fell to Rome under the Ptolemies after the death of Cleopatra, who was also a Ptolemy, aka Greco-Roman. There were multiple Ptolemies and multiple Cleopatras, none of which were Egyptian. These were titles. Outsiders ruling a land in which the well-being of the people was of no concern, milking the land for its riches and using those riches to build elaborate palaces and monuments to themselves and to gods. Much history was lost under the reign of the Ptolemies, as many of the original texts were translated to Greek and hieroglyphic was repackaged with the Ptolemaic seal of secrecy. As well as putting their footprint on the language, this dynasty is also attributed with building massive temples and grandiose public works. The Ptolemies are depicted predominantly on several Egyptian monuments as pharaohs. The lighthouse at Alexandria, on the island of Pharos, is considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. This was built by Ptolemy I, as well as temples, idols, and statues erected for worshiping the god of the sea, Poseidon. As mentioned in the lecture, Poseidon is the father of Belus. Belus is the father of Egyptus, the person by whom Egypt is named. Also, according to Greek mythology, Poseidon married Libya, who is said to be the daughter of Epaphus, king of Egypt. She is the woman for whom the territory of Libya is named. According to the Greeks, Epaphus was the son of Zeus. He and his wife, Memphis, are also said to be the ancestors to the dark Libyans and the Ethiopians. Even the mythology surrounding ancient Egypt is fundamentally Greek. Fact: until Napoleon's invasion in 1798, ancient Egypt, as we know it, did not exist. This area had previously been a post-Caliphate Ottoman Islamic province, and even prior to that, a Byzantine Roman province. And even before that, it was a Roman province. It bordered 3.5 oceans, as evident by their ever-changing maps and views of the world according to the caves. On the Strabo and Ptolemy maps, places that could be easily traveled on foot were completely covered by oceans, which presents an interesting thought. Was that side of the world completely covered with water and 95% of continental Africa did not exist? Or are these maps purposely deceptive? Either way, the more we learn about their story, the less we can trust.
But these astonishing numbers only work in meters. The length of the meter depends on a precise calculation of the circumference of the Earth, and that was only defined in 1793.
The meter and the dimensions of the pyramid are based off the circumference of the Earth. The ball and the pyramid are tied together. The pyramid and the ball and the pyramid, Finkel and Einhorn, Einhorn and Finkel. The ball and the pyramid are tied together. The day of the Geechee is over. The day of the Geechee is over.
Several centuries has wandered in the desert, it is because this shamanic function has been either suppressed or forgotten, and different images of the artist have been held up at different times. The artist as
At the same point during the Ptolemaic era of Egyptian rule, the Hebrew Torah was being translated into Greek. This was done to get the 100,000 Jews who had been taken captive into Egypt by Ptolemy to assimilate into Greek culture. In the mid-2nd century BC, these Hellenized Jews were tasked with the creation of the Septuagint. And even the Septuagint uses the word Mitzraim in its references to Egypt. It must not be avoided that the word Egypt didn't appear until after the creation of the New Testament and the arrival of the Greek. If Egyptus is really Mitzraim, that would make Belus Ham, his father, the progenitor of the Hamites. And if this were true, that would make Noah, captain of the ark, Poseidon, the sea god, who mated with Libya, whose lineage goes back to Zeus. Why was Mitzrayim changed to Egypt? Why was the word stream changed to Nile? Why are there no mentions of pyramids in the Bible? Why were the pyramids missing from early map manuscripts, but churches were clearly visible? Why, when pyramids did begin showing up, they were narrow and varying in numbers, totally inconsistent with the way the pyramids of Giza appear today? How could Napoleon invade Egypt but acquire Middle America? Why is the fleur-de-lis a symbol of France, but also a symbol of corn, when corn is not indigenous to France? Why is corn mentioned in scripture as part of Egypt, but corn is not indigenous to Egypt? And why did it take 6 weeks for Napoleon to cross the Mediterranean? Too many questions and not enough time. To be continued on the next episode of America is Egypt.
if you want to talk about Africa, did y'all know that Arizona is literally the back of Africa? That you could through Arizona, through the Grand Canyon, nigga, which is why they don't let nobody go through it. Did you know that you could walk through the Grand Canyon, and if you keep walking through the Grand Canyon, your ass gonna end up in Africa, nigga? Y'all didn't know that. That's why Arizona got the sunsets they got. Yeah, the only place in the country with them sunsets too is Arizona, ain't it? It's forever hot in Arizona too, ain't it? And if you live in Arizona, you know they don't let your motherfucking ass go through that Grand Canyon, nigga. Why? Because the whole fucking map, nigga, is off Richter, nigga. Nothing is where they told us it was at. Nigga, Arizona, if you go through the Grand Canyon, nigga, and you keep walking, nigga, and your ass keep walking through the Grand Canyon going south, nigga, through the Grand Canyon, nigga, you're going to end up in motherfucking Africa, nigga.
If y'all have heard this or not, but there's a theory now that states that Africa is pretty much within driving distance of Arizona, the Grand Canyon. Yes, you heard me right. And when I heard this, I was like, what? There's no way. But the more I researched it, I'm like, so let's get into it. This is the Pangea map. And this is a map of the world pre-continental drift, which basically shows us that Africa is right next door to North America. So would it be that far off to think that there's a highway to Africa from Arizona? I don't know. Let's look at this.
We have been lied to. WTF, bruh.
Oh, there's more.
They say you can access Africa through the Grand Canyon. I think I found it.
The Grand Canyon is a portal. Shit, the Grand Canyon. That shit. There's a whole civilization living underneath.
Now, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's definitely interesting. What do you think? Let me know below.
Does the Grand Canyon lead to Africa? Somebody wrote that in the comment section, is what they did. And I thought, well, I've not heard that before, and I haven't, if the Grand Canyon leads to Africa. But you know what? They have similar landscapes. They do. Similar peaks. Why? Why is that? Why is that? We got Africa over here. We got the Grand Canyon right here. And they found like Egyptian artifacts and stuff in there before. So it's something that could be quite plausible and with some truth in it. It's really wild. If you didn't hear about that before, I hope you can hear me. I've got my cell phone's about dead. I'm going to see if I can, if I'm going to do it. Gina, honey, you going to do it? Yep. I am. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to turn myself up. And I'm going to see if you all can hear me about does the Grand Canyon lead to Africa? You can't walk in it. It's protected property. It is. Every single bit of it, more or less. And you can't tour it like you want to tour it. Hello, Applebrooks, honey. Hello, Frank. Hello, everyone. If you are just tuning in, Rosie, honey, what are you doing up here? I thought I shut that door, Rosie, but you are up here. Hello, Debbie. Yes. Hello there. Worship the real Father, Ahaya, daughter of Zion. Yeah, I'm trying to. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, you can hear me. It's perfect. Okay, I got it. I got it. Rosie, honey, come over here and say hello. We got to get you to say hello, Rosie. Come on, honey. You're a little baby. Come on, Rosie. You got to get on the live stream with me. Come on, Rosie. Look at Rosie. Isn't she pretty? Rosie, just be careful as you're walking on the live stream. She says, I don't even want to walk up here. Leave me alone. Rosie, honey, you came up here. She did, you all. You got to watch out for Rosie. I'm going to scoot this over here. You got to watch her because she will jump up on this stuff. She'll jump all over. She'll walk all over everything, walk on the keyboard. She could disconnect me, but that's okay. Rosie, honey, you can do it if you want to. So look at this. The Forbidden Zone. The Forbidden Zone of the Grand Canyon, legend, landmarks, and lies. Why would they say lies? The lost civilization in the Grand Canyon was it Egyptian? You can get to Africa from the Grand Canyon. Can you really get to Africa from the Grand Canyon? The path of Africa through the Grand Canyon, you all, look at this. What if it is true? What if it is true? What if you can get to Africa from the Grand Canyon? Well, I don't know if that's Africa right there. It doesn't look like Africa. It doesn't. Rosie, Rosie's laying down on the ground, and she's behind me, just cleaning her paws. Rosie, honey, what you doing there, honey? Let's see if I can get you in here, Rosie. Let me see if I can see Rosie, if you can see Rosie down here. No, my camera's not going to go that far. Let me see. Rosie, can I get you on here? You all, I'm like kind of tied on here. Rosie, honey, where are you down there? I can't get Rosie on here. Oh, well, I don't have a long enough string on my stream deck, but that's okay. She's fine. Let's get to the Grand Canyon. Can you get to the Grand Canyon? The path through Africa through the Grand Canyon. Let's see some pictures of it. I've already got some of the pictures pulled up right here. And you can see some of the hiking trails, the Native people's culturally significant areas. You got some people there. The Grand Canyon National Park. The Kaibab National Forest. I want to see something. Look how pretty that looks. So this is the Grand Canyon. What's that? Fish River Canyon, the Grand Canyon of Africa. Doesn't it make you wonder? Has anyone else's internet been slow, even though you got high-speed internet? You got like fiber optic or something? Looks like a tree got cut down right here. It does. They just like did their lasers and they leveled the Grand Canyon. This is in Africa. Kind of just like the Grand Canyon. Let's read those stories on it. You just tuning in. Let's look at this. The Forbidden Zone. It is forbidden. You can't touch it. Do not touch the forbidden. Look at this, you all. So we're going to see it. Rosie, honey, you're cleaning your toenails. She is. You look at the spirits coming down from here. You all. That looks like a. Look at that photo. It looks like a ship with lightning coming from it. It really does. Albeit like an interdimensional ship. Like, look at all of that. Look over here. It kind of does look like something like that. Your phone won't even charge right now because it's too hot in your apartment. Penny, I believe you. Stick it in the freezer. I know you don't want to stick your head in the freezer, but stick your phone in the freezer to kind of cool it off. But then your freezer's going to get cold. No. Take some vegetables. Take something out of the freezer, Penny, honey. Listen to me. Take something frozen out of your freezer. Put your phone on the ice. Put your phone on the frozen vegetables. Anything's in there, and charge your phone so you can watch this video. You can do it, Penny. You really can. Do it. You got your Penny, we're going to help you out because you need to watch this. That's if anybody else is having trouble. You want to your phone won't heat. Well, this is a thing. This is, where is this at? The Forbidden Zone of the Grand Canyon, the legends, the landmarks, and the lies. Gina, they don't lie. Well, we want to hear about this. It's some kind of a controversy in the last Oh, Rosie's so sweet. In the last decade or so, the controversies and the wild speculations have swirled online about the Grand Canyon National Park. And it was published by the Arizona Gazette in April the 5th of 1909. Yeah. It read The Explorations of the Grand Canyon, the mysteries of the immense rich cavern being brought to light. Jordan enthused remarkable finds indicate ancient people migrated from the Orient. The Grand Canyon controversy is revealing many ways and is also disturbing in many ways. Penny, you got the frozen vegetables. Penny, you let us know if you got your phone there. Just put a barrier between it to see if that is going to charge your phone for you, because we want to know. We got to figure out the ways to keep our phone charged when the house is hot. That's right. You can do it. Even if you have to stand up by the counter, you can do it. The Grand Canyon. Okay, we're talking about the Grand Canyon, you all. The article explains that an explorer named G.E. Concaid, that sounds like Thomas Kincaid, it really does, has made the initial discovery and was joined by the Smithsonian, but he shouldn't have did it. The Smithsonian scientist S.A. Jordan, to study what was described as a wondrous labyrinthian honeycomb of man-made tunnels filled with seemingly Eastern treasures of golden urns, sophisticated copper tools, ancient artifacts, hieroglyphs, and mummified remains and statues whose iconography resemble those common to the Hindu or Egyptian cultures. If their theories are born out of the tablets engraved with the hieroglyphs, the mystery of the prehistoric peoples of North America, their ancient arts, who were, and whence they came, will be solved. Egypt and the Nile and Arizona and the Colorado will be linked to a historical chain running back to ages which stagger the wildest fancy of the fictionists. I wonder, the temperature in Arizona right now, and wherever that Grand Canyon is located, I wonder if the temperature in Africa, if it's like in the same area, like they say, I wonder if the temperatures match. I really do. Well, we know that they can make it rain in certain spots and things like that. Penny, is your phone working? Is it? Okay, let's see what else they got going on. I hope this ain't the end of it. Oh, was the 1909 Grand Canyon article a fabrication? Modern day skeptical writers, academics from the Smithsonian claim the story was simply a piece of sensational yellow journalism. Yes, that's perfect, you all. Now you know how to get your phone to charge. If it's hot, you just get your bag of frozen vegetables out and you can cool your phone off enough to charge it. That's perfect. So look, the Smithsonian declined publicly the story outright over 100 years later and denied any records verifying the existence of Kincaid. The story also asserts that the Smithsonian archaeologist, he returned to Kincaid to investigate the site, and there's no records that confirm the existence of Kincaid or Jordan, you all. Well, I want to see some pictures. Oh, look at that. The Canyon Tomb. Is there actually a secret Egyptian tomb in the Grand Canyon? Well, there probably is. Alternate researchers clamor online the forbidden zone with the Grand Canyon National Park completely forbids anyone to hike, camp, or explore there. They also point out the curious names of the landmarks in this off-limit area. It's the shadow branches of the federal government. They secretly monitor the whole entire area with their drones, is what they do. In the more extremist alternative factions, this is only the tip of the proverbial iceberg as they expand the scope of a complex conspiracy of the subterranean reptilian overlords who are manipulating the ruling elite class. Well, skeptical position is heavily fortified behind the obtuse walls of authority and plausibility, easily defended against one lonesome article published over a century ago. And it's that thing. They say that we have a conflict of interest regarding the manipulation of Manipulation of human history narrative. This is especially true when it comes to the U.S. government and the elevation of indigenous cultures in the early 20th century. What was it? What was it? The landmark. The landmark name suggests there's a bigger truth. It's an undisputed fact. A large grouping of promontories with curious images, high points, summits in the haunted canyon Trinity Creek, included geological formations of Osiris, Isis, Shiva, Horus temples, the Tower of Set, the pyramids of Ra, and Cheops, and all legendary figures of ancient Egypt, India, respectively. Look at that. The Shiva temple, the Tower of Ra. How could they do that? How could did they just destroy it? The stuff? They could have just destroyed it. Rosie, honey, you still sitting down there? Oh, Rosie, honey, she's taking a nap, you all. She really is. She's so tired. Rosie is. She's a little baby. That's okay, Rosie. I can't get the camera to you, but you're having fun up here on a nice green screen floor. That's right. Look. It's worth noting that was this Google Maps? Let's find the Shiva temple. Shall we go to Shiva Maps? We can go to Google Maps and find the Shiva temple in the Grand Canyon, and we can find the Tower of Ra. The Shiva Maps. I want to find the Tower of Ra in the Grand Canyon. I've got to find the Google Maps and quit talking. Let's see if we can find the Google Maps. Google Earth, and find Shiva Ra. No, the Temple of Ra in the Grand Canyon. Let's see, the Temple of Ra. It won't even pull up. Temple of Ra in the Grand Canyon. See if we can find it. What are we going over here for? We're going to this monastery. This is a medieval mountainside in somewhere. I don't want it to go to the monastery. That doesn't look like the Temple of Ra. Oh, I said the Temple of Ta. Gina, it's Ra, not Ta. Well, now you know, my silent army. There is a such thing as called the Temple of Ta. Now we want to try the Ra. Let's move over here. We want to try to find the Tower of Ra. Where is it located, you all? Did they go over there to the Grand Canyon? Is that where they went? To the Grand Canyon? I want to see if they made their way over there. They sure did. They made their way to the Grand Canyon. The Tower of Ra. Let's see what the Grand Canyon looks like. Okay, it looks kind of like a snake. But these are the maps that they tell us how many people are able to go up there and actually look down and see the Tower of Ra. I like to see it. I hope it's a landmark. There's no way you can hike to it. It's forbidden. Let's see if we can get to the Tower of Ra. Well, I don't see a single thing. I have to exit the ground level. You can't even see it. What was the other? Something about Shiva in the Grand Canyon. Let's see what it said. Shiva Temple in the Grand Canyon. Let's see if we can find Shiva Temple. Okay, let's try it. Shiva Temple. Okay, we're going to try to go there. Oh, okay, let's do it. Oh, look at us, you all. We're doing it. There's the Temple of Shiva in the Grand Canyon. But everything is just rocks. You think it's like down here somewhere? The Temple of Shiva. We can't even see anything, but how come they named it that? Well, that's the Grand Canyon. I'm sure there's all kinds of things in there. I really am. Evolving Sylvia. That's a good question. Who named this? Well, I don't know who named it. I don't, but somebody named it. And somebody has a theory that the Grand Canyon will lead you to Africa, which is kind of interesting. It is. Let's see if we can come over here. Oh, okay. Look, as we got some apparently Powell's expedition. It experienced a series of disasters, this guy, and resulted in many of his notes being lost, but it's reasonable to conclude that it was he who gave the names of these landmarks. Curious indeed. So we got these men right here. John Wesley Powell in the Grand Canyon, right there, you all, gave them the names. The Forbidden Zone in the Grand Canyon, and the law. If you, Gina, what are you doing? We're looking at the Grand Canyon, and it's like as you can walk to Africa from the Grand Canyon. That's what they say. Yeah, it would seem that the anonymous author of the article, they were back to 1909. It's challenging when confronted with the next step in research, which validates the claim that this very section of the park is forbidden to explore. The following geographical areas and roads in the Grand Canyon National Park are closed to the public and are restricted by specific activities or specific times for specific activity. Let's see the Hopi Fire Tower and Access Road. Let's go to the Hopi Fire Tower Access Road. And why is it forbidden? We can do it. Let's just check it out. We couldn't understand this location. Okay, well, let me just say Grand Canyon. Okay, we're going to go to something. No, see, they did something else. No, I didn't want that. I wanted, I guess it's in Arizona. I don't even know where it's at. Let me do the Hopi Fire Tower. There. Oh, let's look at this. We're not going to be able to find it. They don't want you to find it. Okay, we might find it. Okay, here's Hopi Point. Okay, it's a high point, but you can't go near it. We have a Horn Creek camp. We have a Monument Creek. We have the Colorado River. We have a granite camp. You can camp on the granite. It's probably really hot there right now. And you got the Shiva Temple. Let's read this article, you all. If you're just tuning in, you can walk from the Grand Canyon to Africa, but you can't because it's all forbidden. You can't go there no more. You can't. Wonder if you ever did. The Maricopa. Hey, that reminds me of the Maricopa sheriff who would feed his prisoners bread with mold on it and bologna with mold on it. And they wore pink striped suits or something like that. The Maricopa Point endangered plant. The Hopi salt mines. What are the Hopi salt mines? Which extends from the river mile 62 to the river mile 62.5 on the southeast side of the Colorado River. And it's precisely where the aforementioned landmarks are located, the south of Hance Rapids. Let's see the Hopi salt mines. We want to see what they look like. Hopi salt mines, because they are salt mines all over the world. All over the world. It's a sacred. Do they got something in this? Oh, it looks really pretty. I've been there. Oh, it's no, this is prints. No, we gotta look at the images, see what the Hopi salt mines look like. Oh wow, like just like this. A red rock art. They got some red rock art. So it's not Red Rock Canyon. It does kind of look like Africa. How would you know that you're not even in Africa? This is to Lake Mead. The place of emergence, expedition to Saipan. I don't even know where that's at. Gina, can you please get on with what you were studying and you quit go looking at this other stuff? Yeah, I can do it. I will do it. It's important to keep in mind the mines are not active mining operations. There's a monstrous text that goes on to discreetly command that nobody is permitted to enter any cave or any mine at the park at any time ever without a permit, which they will never be granted. In addition to artificial anthropogenetic features, the mine works, which comprise a twilight zone and a zone of perpetual darkness, will be managed as caves per the Federal Cave Resources Protection Acts of 1988. And they got a permit that was required to satisfy the section. It may be applied to background country permits. You ain't going to go nowhere where they don't want you to go. So restricted areas were suspicious. Legislation in 1987 restricts the airspace over the Grand Canyon. That's like Area 51, along with 2 other national parks. You cannot fly over Yosemite and Haleakala. They must be in Hawaii. To provide substantial restoration of the natural quiet and experience of the park and protection of the public health and safety from adverse effects associated with aircraft overflight, if you're just tuning in. So what on earth are they blathering about? Restoration of natural quiet, the experience of the park and public health safety. The noise is legitimate. Look, these 3 parks have some other elements in common as well. They're all sites of primordial geologic upheaval, volcanic remnants, karst earth deposits, vast unearthed cave systems, and native lore that revolves around the lost races of the hominins, the demigods, and the deities that were responsible for creation. I've never heard of the hominins. Reminds me of hominy. I don't like hominy, but I ate it. What are the hominins, you all? We wouldn't find out what the hominins are. Okay, there they are right there. The hominins. Okay, they don't want you to go there because of the hominins. It's off limit. No drone. You can't even fly your drone there. Forbidden zones. You can't go to the Mesa Verde, Four Corners, Mummy Cave, and the canyons of the ancient national monuments abandoned. Look at this right here. Stanton's Cave is located South Canyon Camping Beach, but not within the forbidden zone. The cave was originally believed by the authorities to be man-made. It's sealed with metal bars to prevent re-entry. The ceiling of the cave cavity is vaulted, and it does not resemble a natural feature. It's also known that this cavity was inhabited in the distant past, and many precious artifacts were removed. The Mummy Cave in the Grand Canyon, they got a Mummy Cave, 40 to 700 feet, whereas the main dining hall, people lived with no problem. Upwards of 50,000 people could have lived in the caverns comfortably. If you're just tuning in, it looks like 2 big eyeballs looking at you right there. Canyon de Chile, Canyon de Muerto, Canyon of the Dead. Remains of 14 infants were found in the slab-lined cyst used earlier as a storage bin. Below the infants were other children packed in an enormous basket. It looked like great big gigantic eyes. Mummy Caves, Legacies and Liars, you all. There was a study of the decay of races through the survival of the unfit. 1899. Let's see this. Jordan served as president of Stanford University and was a fervent believer in eugenics. Jordan's primitive pseudoscience and xenophobic paranoia led him to write an essay of the study of the decay of races through the survival of the unfit. Well, I don't think that's very nice. It's back in 1899. He illustrated his irrationality regarding the race degeneration and implored the effectuation of tremendous efforts designed to maintain the racial unity. He also, it was Jordan who led a nationwide sterilization program, which clearly was a crime against humanity. In 2003, many buildings in California were shamefully stripped of his name, and the California legislature unanimously expressed its profound regret over the state's past role in the eugenics movement. I've heard of people, my mother told me about people who were sterilized against their will. Yeah, lots of people who were. The Smithsonian, look at this. Thanks a lot for doing what you did. Through the Looking Glass, it's the Smithsonian has been less than forthcoming about its affiliation. Unlocking a mystery. So this is one, but I don't really like that one right there. That don't have no good pictures to it, you all. It doesn't. If you're just tuning in, I'm up here. And Rosie's on the floor behind me sleeping. I would like to see some pictures, but there aren't any pictures. So let's see if we can find some ancient artifacts. Egyptian artifacts. Let's do this. EGYPTIAN artifacts. Grand Canyon. We want to look at them if they have anything to look at. Oh, no, I can't go to somebody's YouTube channel. That's their YouTube channel. I can't do it. I can't take their stuff. I won't do it either. It's loading really slow. Okay. Where was this found at? I guess maybe some of this was found in the Grand Canyon, you think? We've got that. Let me make this really big and we can just scroll over it. If I make it really big, we can just move the screen right there. That's right. We got some artifacts right there in the Grand Canyon. The Egyptian tomb in the Grand Canyon. What's it doing there? Looks like it's got something nice in there. The Egyptian lost city discovered in the Grand Canyon. Let's bring it down a little. I can't read that. Egyptian artifacts. That's kind of inappropriate. I don't like to see the inappropriateness. I don't. I'm going to go right past that inappropriateness. The ancient artifacts. Do you think that was in the Grand Canyon? No, that's Egypt, Gina, honey. Okay, here's some artifacts right here. I did skip an ancient picture. I know I did. Look at these. They look like urns. They were found in the hole right here in the wall. Let's see what it looked like if they were found in there. Let's see if we can open that up over here. I don't know what it's going to do. The Hopi Indians believe it is the gateway to the afterlife in the Grand Canyon. Get this off of there, you. I got some threats that got blocked. Its sheer immensity and mystery has attracted more than 6 million visitors in 2016, named by the Hopi Indians. Mummies and artifacts in the Grand Canyon. The answer is pretty clear. These gold artifacts from the Concaid Tunnel are on display in the Smithsonian Institute of Washington, D.C. from the Grand Canyon. The back 2 artifacts are for King Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti. Look at that. The Grand Canyon. So it really would make sense that it was part of Africa. There's a theory that they renamed the places too. How could they find it there if you think about it? Because it's in another place. Wait a minute. I think I know how. Because according to one theory, you can fit all the countries inside Africa, the continent of Africa itself. All the countries that we have will fit into Africa. We did a video on it. Egyptian artifacts found in the Grand Canyon, Zoroaster Temple in the Grand Canyon. Jordan, who worked for the Smithsonian, described their experiences. In the Grand Canyon, over 100 feet from the entrance is the Cross Hall, several hundred feet long, in which are found the idol or image of the people's god, sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower or lily in each hand. On April of 1909, the Arizona Gazette said this sensational article, It is the Grand Canyon's largest enigma. The cast of a face is an oriental, and the carving of this cavern, the ancestor and the children's names are on the artifact. The small gold artifact found in Concaid's tunnel. Page right here, you can see it, but we can't see it. You got King Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti. The idol resembles Buddha. The artifacts, let's see what this is. So you tell me, do the artifacts or the writing found on the Grand Canyon appear to be created by the Native Americans or by ancient Egyptians? Well, what if the Native Americans are the ancient Egyptians, and what if they just kind of migrated over here with it, and maybe that was the Indians, that the people came over and they got rid of all the tribes. Maybe that was what happened. They couldn't have nothing coming out about Indian tribes, turned the tribes against one another, conquered them. Even though the many large or smaller images were found in the tunnel of the Grand Canyon, this artifact was an important discovery of the Smithsonian. The story goes with, ooh, what's that? That looks really nice. Egyptian artifacts, Grand Canyon, mystery, ancient civilization. Is this an artist's rendition of what it possibly looked like? And they destroyed any and everything. You think this stuff might have got destroyed in like a mud flood, or did they just take their lasers from their ships above and just like poof, did a demolition, just blew everything up? They could have. They really could have. This is what they looked like in the Grand Canyon. There's been a lot of other things. Thomas Concaid. One time when we lived in Hawaii, I went trash picking. They threw out good stuff, and I found a Thomas Concaid picture. So I threw it out, and you know what it said? Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. That was the words that was written on it. It was a comment. I still have it. Thomas Concaid. Okay, what's this? Artifacts found in the Grand Canyon. Well, look at that. That looks really interesting too. That looks like the Eye of Horus right there. You saw clouds that looked like the face of a lion and a mouth and a whole head. A wolf face. You stared back at it. Well, I'm sure you did. That stuff would be up there. Really, if you think about it, it would be right up there. See some of this other stuff. This is the cover-up of the Smithsonian of ancient Egyptians in the Grand Canyon, and they took the giants' bones and they just dumped them in the ocean too, so nobody would know about the giants. I don't know if I'd want to go in these caves in the Grand Canyon. I really don't, because I don't know what kind of species might be down there in the caves. It might not be too. Looks like the water. Canyon is seeing evidence of ancient Egypt in the Grand Canyon. Sure they do. The Grand Canyon is kind of mysterious. It's I can't see what I got written down here. It's off-limit areas. I guess you can paddle by boat, but you can't fly your drone over the Grand Canyon. The pyramids of the Grand Canyon is off-limit. You all, do you live in the Grand Canyon? Do you live near the Grand Canyon? Are you seeing there's pyramids in the Grand Canyon like this? When the Smithsonian's discovered an ancient Egyptian colony, have you ever seen them in the Grand Canyon? The Grand Canyon is Egypt. It's Egypt. It's Africa. It's all of that. How do they keep everything so straight? How do they keep us from finding out about one another, the land stuff? And I'm not going to say much more. I'm not, but I'm really wondering if there are pyramids in the Grand Canyon. There's supposed to be pyramids everywhere. I was looking around the hills of Fort Knox and that area up there in Kentucky, see if I could find hills that look like they were pyramids. And they kind of thought, well, they could have been. Okay, well, let's look at these pictures. See what they say was a pyramid, and they think they knocked their heads off. The proof the Grand Canyon monuments are ancient pyramids. Well, they very well could be. Look at that. They're kind of stair-stepped. There would be a lot of pyramids around there if you look at the different levels, but they really could be ancient pyramids right here. are the Grand Canyon monuments, except they just destroyed some of them. What's that? It's Egyptian statues found there. Well, they kind of look like trees that got cut down too. What if they are that? They cut the tops of the trees off. Big ancient forest. It could be anything, really. But I like the idea of pyramids. I do, since they found ancient artifacts and stuff like that. The Orion Zone. Well, we got the pyramids of the Grand Canyon is an off limit, and we got the Orion Zone. The maker of Orion. Mintaka, Alanatak, Arizona star correlation. I don't really know much about this stuff like this, but it looks kind of interesting. It does. Oh, right. What's that? It's off limits. Are there any more? I'm not going to go in there. What is that? That looked like a big serpent face. Looked like a dragon's face. Fontainebleau, Francia. You think they're ancient giants? You got the big turtle. Blurs the line between reality and fiction. No, I don't want to log in. Look like a lion. They could have turned everything into stone. They really could have. You can see these pictures. This is really, they really did. Rosie, honey, I hear you stretching your little toenails. Underwater Museum. Gina, you are supposed to be talking, it's like an alien. You're supposed to be talking about the Grand Canyon, but there's these beings here engraved in rocks. I am talking about the Grand Canyon. I'm not going to, okay. Is this what Wade was doing? And I got real sidetracked looking at the pyramids. Okay. Oh, so you think this was found in there too? An ancient thing. I'm sure if they said they found it in the Grand Canyon. It was ancient Egyptian artifacts found in here. I'd like, oh, they got some walls. You'll never get to see everything. Look at all the sites. The Temple of Osiris, the Confucius Temple, Temple of Ra, Dragon Head, Grandma Point, Tower of Set, Buddha Temple, Cheops Pyramid, Phantom, things like that, you all. These are more. Are there Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon? If they are, they destroyed them all, or they're off limit and you can't see them. It's bound to be. And what about all the Egyptian like stones found in these caves and stuff too? Well, look at him. Look at this. Look like it's gold. Gold and stuff right there. I am going to go. It's something that you can look into, you all. Does the Grand Canyon lead to Africa? Well, it could lead to Africa. Let me do this. Can you fit all the countries into Africa? This is the true size of Africa. You can fit these countries in there. United States, China, India, Eastern Europe, France, Germany. We did a video on this. Isn't that interesting? What if the history is not the real history? It's quite possibly. It quite possibly isn't. There's so many theories out there, you all. We could all have like a continent, everything. There may not be no big divide like we see everywhere. It may be just great big gigantic masses and some water, bodies of water everywhere. It's wild. It is so wild. I am going to go. And thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your comments. You all, you should look up on that.
Questions about the cultural exchange. Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone. History, as it is often taught, tells us that Africans arrived in the Americas only as enslaved people during the transatlantic slave trade. This version of history, however, is incomplete. A growing body of evidence suggests that Black people were present in the Americas thousands of years before Christopher Columbus set foot in the New World. The idea that ancient African navigators, traders, and settlers reached the Americas long before European explorers challenges deeply ingrained historical narratives, raising new questions about the cultural exchanges that shaped early American civilizations. The presence of Black people in pre-Columbian America is not just a matter of speculation. It is supported by a variety of historical, archaeological, linguistic, and genetic evidence. Ancient African mariners are believed to have traveled across the Atlantic Ocean, establishing contacts with indigenous American societies. These early voyages were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader tradition of African exploration and trade. This article explores the compelling evidence that points to early African presence in the Americas, the influence of African cultural and technological contributions on indigenous civilizations, and the systematic suppression of this history by colonial powers. By examining these historical connections, we gain a deeper understanding of the complexity and diversity of human migration and interaction long before European conquest reshaped the world. One of the most significant pieces of evidence supporting the presence of Black people in the Americas before Columbus is the seafaring capabilities of ancient African civilizations. Long before European maritime exploration, African cultures had developed advanced shipbuilding techniques and navigational knowledge that enabled them to undertake long-distance voyages across the ocean. The ancient Egyptians, Carthaginians, and Malians are among the African civilizations believed to have had the capacity for transatlantic travel. The maritime achievements of ancient Egyptians are well documented. Egyptian reliefs and murals depict large, seafaring vessels capable of long voyages. Inscriptions from the time of Pharaoh Necho, circa 600 BCE, describe an African circumnavigation of the continent, suggesting that Egyptian and Nubian mariners were already exploring distant regions. Some scholars believe that Egyptian explorers may have reached the Americas, bringing their knowledge and culture with them. In addition to the Egyptians, the Carthaginians, descendants of the Phoenicians, were known for their exceptional navigational skills. They established extensive trade networks across the Mediterranean and beyond, and there is evidence suggesting that they may have ventured as far as the Americas. Carthaginian coins and artifacts have been found in regions of South America, further supporting the possibility of pre-Columbian African contact. Perhaps the most well-documented case of an African expedition to the Americas comes from the Mali Empire. In the 14th century, Mali's ruler, Munsai Abubakari II, is said to have launched an ambitious voyage across the Atlantic with a fleet of 2,000 ships. While mainstream history dismisses this voyage as a legend, historical records from Arab scholars such as Al-Amari describe Abubakari's departure and his abdication of the throne in pursuit of new lands. The striking similarities between West African and Mesoamerican cultural elements suggest that his expedition may have reached the Americas and left a lasting impact on indigenous societies. Archaeological discoveries across the Americas provide compelling evidence of early African contact. One of the most significant findings is the presence of large, carved stone heads in the ancient Olmec civilization of Mesoamerica. The Olmec civilization, which flourished in present-day Mexico around 1200 BCE, left behind massive stone sculptures depicting individuals with distinctively African features, including broad noses, full lips, and tightly coiled hair. These sculptures have led many researchers to believe that the Olmecs had interactions with African visitors or settlers. Beyond the Olmec heads, other artifacts point to early African influence in the Americas. African-style cotton, gourds, and linguistic similarities between certain African and indigenous American languages further support this theory. The presence of African DNA markers in some indigenous American populations also suggests intermingling between African and native peoples long before European contact. Additionally, similarities between African and American agricultural practices, such as the construction of earth mounds, indicate possible transatlantic exchanges. Both West African and Mesoamerican civilizations built large ceremonial mounds for religious and social purposes, a shared practice that suggests a connection between the two cultures. This connection challenges the conventional narrative that such developments occurred in isolation. Despite the compelling evidence of African presence in the Americas before Columbus, this history has been systematically suppressed. European colonial powers sought to control historical narratives to justify their conquests and establish racial hierarchies that placed Africans and indigenous peoples at the bottom. Recognizing that Africans had been global explorers and contributors to ancient civilizations would have challenged the Eurocentric worldview that portrayed Africans as primitive and incapable of advanced achievements. During the colonial period, European historians dismissed or actively suppressed accounts of African voyages to the Americas. Early European explorers, including Columbus himself, documented encounters with dark-skinned indigenous peoples in the Caribbean and South America. Yet these accounts were largely ignored or reinterpreted to fit colonial narratives. Spanish chroniclers such as Bartolomé de las Casas noted that some native peoples describe encounters with African traders, but these records were not given serious consideration by mainstream historians. Additionally, the transatlantic slave trade played a significant role in erasing African contributions to American history. The forced migration of millions of Africans to the Americas created a narrative that framed Africans solely as enslaved laborers rather than as explorers, traders, or contributors to early American civilizations. This narrative continues to shape mainstream historical perspectives today. The history of Black people in America long before Columbus is a story of exploration, cultural exchange, and resilience. From the advanced seafaring capabilities of ancient African civilizations to the archaeological and linguistic evidence of African influence in the Americas, the case for pre-Columbian African contact is strong. However, the systematic suppression of this history has led to widespread ignorance of these early connections. By reclaiming and acknowledging this hidden history, we gain a more accurate understanding of the complexity of human migration and cultural interaction. The story of Black people in the Americas before Columbus is not just an alternative historical perspective. It is an essential part of the global human story, one that deserves recognition and further exploration.
It's unfortunate that some people believe the stories taught to us in compulsory education about America's history. Many are willing to hold on to the belief that every so-called fact presented to us by our teachers during childhood is correct and accurate. However, we often forget that those same teachers advised us to hold all of our questions until the end of the lesson. Some may not see an issue with this approach, but considering how people learn, it becomes clear that asking questions is crucial. Individuals learn best by inquiring when their questions are fresh in their mind. It is more beneficial to ask questions as they arise, even if it disrupts the class flow, to ensure they aren't forgotten. If the teacher asks students to hold their questions until the end of the lesson, and this leads a child to forget what they wanted to ask when their questions first arose, whose fault is it if the child trying to learn loses interest in the lesson because their questions are ignored? This is why America's school curriculum is considered indoctrination, which is the process of teaching a person or a group of people to accept one set of beliefs uncritically. Uncritically meaning without question, or with a lack of criticism or consideration of whether something is right or wrong. They don't want you to question anything taught in school, which is a major issue. The students who are exposed to this indoctrination will grow up and become adults, repeating the same misinformation and accepting it as fact. This is why many teachers, professors, and even most content creators online often don't know half of what they're talking about. They tend to repeat the same misleading information because society increasingly encourages people to accept others' opinions as facts. For example, many of us have been led to believe that the term Iroquois comes from the French language. This assumption implies that the French, who encountered these indigenous American people in the 1600s, were the ones who had created the term and named the indigenous people they met in America, as if they had colonized them without any restrictions. I encourage you to question everything and reflect on what we are taught. Ask yourself, if the French supposedly named these indigenous people of America, why are the French colonists not mentioned by name individually in the curriculums that cover the history of the Iroquois people? There should be more than one colonist who is said to have led an army of French individuals into war against the Iroquois people in America. Not only should the names, dates, and locations of these colonists be recorded, but also the details of the French army they supposedly brought with them, as they traveled many miles from their homeland of France to confront indigenous people who were highly familiar with the American landscape. The more you question the narrative you were taught about the Iroquois, the more you may realize that it lacks credibility, as it does not logically add up.
It's definitely not adding up. It's not adding up.
The exact origin and meaning of the term Iroquois have been deliberately misrepresented. This distortion is part of their manipulative agenda, aimed at convincing indigenous people of America that foreigners or outsiders have always controlled the land, even as far back as the 1600s. This narrative is not true. For example, anonymous contributors to the deceptive, self-proclaimed online encyclopedia called Wikipedia have lied to their readers about the exact origins and meaning of the term Iroquois. The site claims that Iroquois derives from the French words Iroquois, Iroquois, and Iroquois. The issue is that this misconception is nothing more than a myth, a widely held but false belief or idea, often influenced by a religious society. This mythology is derived from the religious society of the Jesuits. For research purposes, you will find their mythological deception in stories called the Jesuit Relations and Allied Documents, Travels and Explorations of the Jesuit Missionaries in New France from 1610 to 1791. These were translated into English and published in the United States in 1898 by the Burroughs Brothers Company. This was their way of teaching the Jesuit missionaries their Christianity-inspired indoctrination so that they may travel with the belief that their falsified stories were the actual reality. These words that they want you to believe were used to describe the indigenous people of America, known as the Iroquois, do not have definitions in the French dictionary. In fact, if you use Google Translate to convert these words from French to English, you will not find any definition indicating that they refer to the Iroquois people. I'm sure this will change soon after I publish this video, as individuals are lurking around my channel who are eager for me to expose their agendas. Okay?
Iroquois. Iroquois. Iroquoise. Iroquoise. Iroquois. Iroquois.
By this point, you might be expecting me to reveal the exact origin and meaning of the term Iroquois. I will do so, but first, I want to ensure you understand its pronunciation clearly, as it does reveal its meaning. It is not pronounced Iroquois or Iroquois. The correct pronunciation is Iroquois. This pronunciation reflects its Algonquin origin, which is evident in our English language today. Did you catch the meaning? Let's explore it further. Now, it is essential to note that this Algonquin term, Iroquois, was not used by the people that it is referring to. Again, it is essential to note that this Algonquin term, Iroquois, was not used by the people that it is referring to because they spoke a different dialect, and I'll go into that at another time. The Algonquin term Iroquois refers to the Haudenosaunee tribe. The Algonquin-speaking tribes took notice of how often the Haudenosaunee suffered great losses, pain, and sorrow. They were constantly mourning how their tribes had been infiltrated by the foreign influence of Christian missionaries and had borrowed special ceremonies from the Algonquin-speaking tribes, which brought forth purity and peace of mind. Before they were transformed into wampum and used in clothing and various other applications, white shells found along lakes, rivers, and beaches were placed up to the ears to allow people to hear the soothing sounds of the wind or the air. This practice served as a form of meditation, helping to bring peace and clarity. It was said that if you could hear the air speak, then the Great Spirit would bring peace upon you. In other words, clear your mind. Despite frequently being at odds with one another, the Algonquin-speaking tribes used the term Iroquois as a nickname for the Haudenosaunee. This name reflected their perception of the Haudenosaunee characteristics and the key attributes they had adopted into their own ways of life. The conflicts between the tribes were often exacerbated by poor decision-making, which allowed foreigners or outsiders to infiltrate their lands. 98% of the Algonquin languages have been adopted into the English language. And if you say the term out loud 3 times, you will immediately hear the English meaning. Iroquois, Iroquois, Iroquois corresponds to equality in English. The term Iroquois is a derogatory way to refer to the Haudenosaunee, implying that their mental stability is lacking and that in this context, their air quality is naturally poor. If you want me to continue teaching about the indigenous languages and America's true history, leave the number 13 in the comments and I'll fulfill your requests. Wado.
of a slave ship, that you were strangers to this land, outsiders who had to earn your place. But what if they were wrong? What if the truth is, you were already here? Before Columbus, before the Pilgrims, before the borders were drawn, before the textbooks were written. What if the first people to walk this land looked like you? Dark skin, woolly hair, strong features, free. What if your great-great-grandmother wasn't taken from Africa, but born on American soil under the stars of this land as an indigenous person? This isn't a theory. This isn't a myth. This is history, buried, erased, and rebranded. Because long before African American was a label, there were black Native American nations with names, languages, governments, and land. And when colonizers couldn't enslave them, they reclassified them from tribe to colored, from sovereign to slave. In this video, we'll reveal the hidden tribes, the stolen bones, the DNA they don't want you to test, and the real reason they don't want you to know that America's first people were also black. Because if you know you were already here, you'll stop asking for a seat at the table and start reclaiming the land it sits on. Think back to what you were taught in school. They said the first people in America came from Asia, that thousands of years ago, tribes crossed a frozen land bridge from Siberia into Alaska. They wandered down through Canada and over time spread across the continent. You were told they were the first Americans, and every image you saw looked the same: light brown skin, straight black hair, high cheekbones, feathers, and face paint. You were taught that Native Americans were one thing, one image, one narrative. Anything outside of that didn't exist. They never told you about the black tribes. They never mentioned dark-skinned nations with African features. They never showed you early colonial maps with tribal names that sound nothing like the ones in modern textbooks. Instead, they simplified, they sanitized, they curated a version of native history that excluded you. Hollywood ran with it. Cartoons, westerns, and documentaries all repeated the same characters: the noble red man, the wise old chief, the stoic warrior, but never the black woman with braids, never the dark-skinned elder sitting on tribal land, never the man with dreadlocks speaking his native tongue. And yet, there are records, there are photos, there are witnesses who described black indigenous tribes right here in America. So why were they erased? Because the mainstream story was never about truth. It was about control. Control over identity, control over land, control over legacy. If you believed you were just a slave, just an import from Africa, then you had no claim to this land, no ancestral connection, no birthright. But if it turned out that your bloodline was already rooted here, if your ancestors were among the original inhabitants of this land, then everything changes. Because indigenous status isn't just historical, it's legal. It comes with land, recognition, and rights. And those rights were systematically stripped from black people by redefining who they were, through censuses, through court rulings, through school books, through silence. They gave you a version of history that started at the dock, but your story might have started in the soil. In the next part, we'll uncover the names and faces of the tribes they erased, and why your grandmother may have been right when she said, "We got Indian in our blood." Before Columbus ever touched American soil, before the word slave was used to describe a single black body, there were black nations already living in the Americas. They had names, languages, governments, land, and most importantly, freedom. Let's start with one of the most powerful but forgotten, the Yamasee. This tribe once occupied large parts of what is now Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. Early European explorers described them as dark-skinned, woolly-haired people, organized and highly spiritual. They traded, farmed, and defended their territory fiercely. But after colonization, they were pushed out, absorbed into other tribes or reclassified as Negroes in census records. Then there's the Wachita Nation, one of the oldest sovereign nations in North America, recognized even by international organizations before being wiped from US records. The Wachita trace their lineage not to slave ships, but to a deep, continuous connection with the Mississippi Valley and the South. Their oral traditions speak of pyramid builders, astronomers, and ancient black presence in the Americas long before contact. And don't forget, the Black Seminoles. This wasn't just a group of escaped slaves. This was a fusion of indigenous and African peoples who formed powerful alliances in Florida. They had their own towns, fought in the Seminole Wars, and were hunted by US forces, not because they were runaways, but because they were free. Early European maps even list tribal names like Chata, Yamasi, Atacapa, and Timucua in areas where dark-skinned people were documented living peacefully and independently. So, where did they go? They didn't disappear. They were reclassified. The Yamasee were renamed Negro. The Washita were marked colored. The Black Seminoles were stripped of land and listed as freedmen. And just like that, they were removed from history, all so the narrative could be clean. So Native American could mean one thing, and black people could be permanently labeled as outsiders. But the truth is too old to erase. It lives in oral tradition, in family stories, in the ancestral memory that refuses to die. You've heard your elders say, we have Indian in our blood, we're part Cherokee, we're Creek, Seminole, Yamasee. That's not just folklore. That's truth whispered through generations, waiting to be confirmed. And now, thanks to hidden records, maps, and ancestral knowledge, it's being resurrected. Because if your people were here before Columbus, then your roots go deeper than they ever told you. And in the next part, we go even deeper, into the DNA they've been trying to downplay, and how the blood in your veins still carries the proof they hoped would vanish. Hello, dear viewers. We noticed from our analytics that we are having an international community of viewers. Please tell us where you are watching from in the comments section below. They can rewrite history books. They can erase names from maps. They can burn documents and rename tribes. But there's one thing they can't erase: your DNA. Because long after the papers were shredded, long after the bones were hidden, the truth kept living inside of you. Let's talk about mitochondrial DNA, the kind passed down from mother to child. It's one of the strongest tools we have for tracing ancestry back thousands of years. Unlike regular DNA, it doesn't mix. It stays almost exactly the same through generations. Now here's the shocker. Some of the oldest mitochondrial haplogroups found in the Americas trace back to sub-Saharan Africa, and they appear in skeletal remains that predate slavery. That's right, African DNA on American soil before a single slave ship ever touched the coast. And that's not all. E-chromosome markers passed from father to son also show ancient African lineages in native populations across the southeast and Gulf Coast. We're not talking about recent blending. We're talking deep roots embedded in the genetics of tribes long believed to be purely native or Asian in origin. And yet, commercial DNA companies almost never show this. Why? Because their databases are based on modern reference samples, not ancient ones. If your ancestors were indigenous but reclassified as colored, there's a good chance your black indigenous heritage gets erased again by algorithm. You'll get vague results like broadly West African, Nigerian, 0% Native American. But how can that be? How can your family carry generations of oral history, tribal memory, and cultural practice, yet your report says none of it exists? Because the system isn't designed to tell the truth. It's designed to sell an identity, and that identity has been filtered, distorted, and sanitized to keep the same lie intact, that black people came here in chains, and that's where their story starts. But your DNA says otherwise. It whispers stories of mothers born on this land, not in the cargo hold of a ship. It speaks of fathers who hunted these forests long before there was a border. It holds the memory of tribes that carried both African and indigenous blood, because they were one and the same. You weren't just dropped here by force. You may have always been here, by birthright. And that's the threat. Because if too many people start tracing their DNA back to indigenous black roots, it reopens the question of land, sovereignty, and identity. It destroys the lie of the outsider and it forces the world to see black people not as intruders but as the original architects of America. So they downplay it, they call it inconclusive. They bury it beneath percentages and graphs, but blood doesn't lie, and yours, it remembers. In the next part, we reveal the colonial journals and explorer records that confirm everything your DNA already knows, because this isn't just a story of science, it's a story of survival. We've been told that when Europeans arrived, they found red-skinned natives with feathers and bows, that the indigenous people were all one shade, one language group, one stereotype. But the explorers themselves told a very different story. The first Europeans to land on American soil wrote journals, letters, and reports, and many of those writings are still hidden in dusty archives, ignored by mainstream history. So what did they actually see? They saw black people, living in villages, organized in tribal nations. Free, Spanish explorers in the 1500s documented tribes in Florida and the Southeast with dark skin and woolly hair. Not slaves, not immigrants, natives. Hernando de Soto wrote about encountering powerful communities of dark-skinned people in Georgia. Early French traders along the Mississippi described meeting tribes that looked African, not Asian. Even Benjamin Franklin once commented that the complexion of many native tribes resembled that of the Africans. So why were these accounts erased? Because the people they described didn't fit the story that was being built. A story where black people came later, where they were outsiders, where they could be denied land, status, and voice, because they weren't original. If the world knew that black tribes had lived, traded, governed, and resisted on this land before Columbus, then the lie of "you don't belong here" would collapse. But it gets deeper. By the 1700s and 1800s, laws were passed to reclassify people. Tribes that were once recognized as native were suddenly listed in censuses as Negro, colored, or free person of color. Families who had lived on the same land for centuries lost everything because the paper said they weren't Indian anymore. This wasn't just about racism. It was about removing legal claims to land. By rewriting who people were on paper, entire nations were erased with ink. Ask your elders, ask your grandmother who said she was part Cherokee or Creek. She wasn't lying, she was remembering. But when she tried to get tribal status, the government told her she was black, not native, because the documents had been changed generations earlier. This is how history was stolen, not with guns, but with pens. The colonists saw the truth. They wrote it down, and then the system buried it. But those writings still exist. In journals, in archives, in the dusty corners of old libraries, waiting to be read again. Because once you understand that the first Americans weren't just brown, but black, in skin, in features, in culture, everything changes. In the next part, we expose how museums, governments, and elite institutions made sure that truth never made it to your classroom. Because if you know who you are, you start asking for what's yours. You'd think if there were real evidence, bones, artifacts, skulls, tools, that proved ancient black people lived in America before Columbus, we'd all know about it. But we don't, because that evidence wasn't preserved. It was suppressed. Let's talk about one of the biggest players in America's historical cover-up, the Smithsonian Institution. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, amateur archaeologists and farmers across the US began unearthing mounds, skulls, and artifacts, unlike anything in their textbooks. Some of these bones had African features, others were gigantic, some over 7 feet tall. Tools and pottery were uncovered in layers of earth that predated the so-called first Americans. So, where did this evidence go? Thousands of skeletons and relics were collected and sent to the Smithsonian, and then they vanished. Former insiders have alleged that the Smithsonian actively destroyed or sealed any remains that didn't match the approved narrative. They weren't interested in history, they were protecting a story. Because if black people were here first, if there were African-featured tribes before the land bridge migrants, it would turn everything upside down. Think about it. Every land treaty, every reservation, every racial label, every legal status built on the assumption that black people were outsiders, and indigenous people were a separate group. But if the two were connected, if black people were indigenous, then America would owe you far more than just an apology. It would owe you land, recognition, reparations, respect. And they weren't about to let that happen. So the bones were buried. The reports were labeled inconclusive. The discoveries were written off as misinterpretation or hoaxes. Even universities joined in. Professors who suggested alternative migration theories were denied funding. Graduate students were warned not to write theses on black indigenous history. Archaeologists were told to stay in line or lose their careers. This wasn't just academic censorship, it was a coordinated silencing. The government even passed laws like NAGPRA, meant to protect native remains, but often used to hide anything that challenged the accepted tribal structure. Because once you admit that black tribes existed, you have to revisit the entire map. And the institutions built their power on keeping that map locked in place. So the public got fed a safe, simple version of history. Red Indians, Columbus, slaves, immigrants. But in reality, the true story is far older and far blacker. The cover-up worked for a while, but now the cracks are showing. Too many oral histories, too much bloodline data, too many missing documents, with too many questions. And now you're starting to ask those questions. You're starting to feel it, that something never added up, and you're not alone. In the next part, we'll show how Hollywood, textbooks, and media used imagery to erase your face from the native story. So even when your bones were in the land, your image was wiped from the memory. By now the question is loud and clear. If black people were among America's first inhabitants, why don't we see that anywhere? Why aren't there statues, school posters, or movies showing black indigenous tribes? Why isn't there a single image in a textbook of a native with dark skin and woolly hair? Because it wasn't just the bones they buried the image too. Let's talk about the power of perception. From the 1800s to now, America's cultural machinery, Hollywood, publishing, museums, even cartoons, has carefully created and maintained a single image of the Native American. High cheekbones, copper skin, feathers, straight black hair, often stoic, sometimes mystical, always other. That image became the standard, and anyone who didn't match it, erased. Black native tribes were too complex for the narrative. They didn't fit neatly into categories. So they were removed, not by war, but by design. Textbooks replaced real history with myth. Hollywood turned real tribes into side characters, and school curriculum narrowed an entire continent of diversity into one generic stereotype. Even in places like the Southeast, where black native communities were common, their stories were replaced with Pocahontas-style fiction. And in modern times, DNA companies and identity gatekeepers continued the erasure by telling black Americans, "You're African, not native," even when their family trees, oral histories, and physical features said otherwise. But let's go deeper. If media had shown Native Americans with dark skin, if textbooks had acknowledged African features in ancient tribes, if children grew up seeing that black people were not just slaves or immigrants, but original people of the land, it would have changed everything. It would have destroyed the idea that you don't belong. It would have crushed the myth that you were an outsider to America. It would have made the world ask, if black people were the first, why don't they have more? And the answer would have led to land. And land leads to power. So instead, they sold you a lie. They made native a costume. They made black a category. And they made sure the two would never mix in your mind. But culture is memory. And memory doesn't die. It waits. And now people are remembering. They're digging up old family Bibles. They're rereading census records. They're questioning why their great-grandparents were called free people of color, but lived on land passed down for generations. Land never bought, only inherited. The truth was never completely erased. It was just covered with enough layers to make you stop looking, until now. In the next part, we ask the question that matters most. What does this mean for you right now. Not just historically, but spiritually, culturally, and personally, because you weren't just erased from the story. You're the part they feared most. Let's pause for a moment, because this isn't just about bones, DNA, or erased names. This is about you. If you're a Black American, if your family has deep roots in the South, if your elders ever said, "We got Indian in us," and nobody believed them, then this isn't a theory, it's your truth, because now we know that the story they gave you, the one that started in chains, was incomplete. Your story might have started in soil, not ships. Your ancestors may have walked these woods, fished these rivers, planted these fields, long before any colonizer drew a map. They may have signed treaties, led nations, spoke languages that are now forgotten, and raised children on the land you're still standing on. But somewhere along the way, they were told they weren't native anymore. They were reclassified, renamed, erased from the official records. Not because they changed, but because the system needed them to disappear. If they could take your tribal name and turn it into a racial label, if they could strip your identity and call you Negro or colored instead of Yamasee, Washita, or Seminole, then they could take the land too, and the rights, and the history. And that's exactly what happened. So what does this mean for you? It means you have more power than they ever wanted you to realize, because if you're indigenous, you don't just descend from survival, you descend from sovereignty. You're not just the legacy of resistance, you're the legacy of ownership, of belonging, of being first, of being home. This truth flips everything on its head, because the story of America isn't just one of conquest and slavery. It's the story of how Black people were here before the boats, and how they were erased to protect power. And now, that story is coming back. That's why you're seeing more Black Americans reclaiming tribal names, looking deeper into family records, filing lawsuits, asking questions, demanding the right to define who they are, not by blood quantum, but by birthright. Because once you see yourself as part of the original nations of this land, everything changes. You walk different, you speak different, you stop begging for identity and start reclaiming it. So ask yourself, what did your family always know that the government didn't want them to prove? Who were you before you were told what to be? In the next part, we'll talk about how this movement is growing and how you can be part of a generation that remembers what was stolen and takes it back. You're not alone in this awakening. All across the country and around the world, Black people are remembering. They're questioning, researching, digging into old family Bibles, birth certificates, death records, and oral histories that never stopped whispering the truth. They're realizing that the stories their grandparents told were never superstition. They were survival, because even when the system erased tribal names, the people held on to memories. And now those memories are becoming movements. There are Black Americans today reclaiming tribal names once listed in government rolls. Names like Yamasee, Creek Freedman, Blackfoot, Washita, Seminole, and more. There are grassroots efforts to revive indigenous languages, clothing, ceremonies, and sovereign structures. Not to mimic the past, but to revive what was stolen. They're not asking for permission. They're not waiting for the textbooks to change. They're building their own history books. Some are filing lawsuits to restore land rights. Others are fighting to have their tribal heritage acknowledged without needing validation from the very system that erased it. And for many, just knowing the truth has already changed everything. Because once you know who you are, you stop letting other people define you. You stop believing your worth began in slavery. You stop accepting the lie that your people were always visitors in their own land. You start walking like someone who belongs. This remembrance is powerful, not because it's new, but because it was always there, waiting for the right moment to rise again. And this is that moment. If you're watching this, you're part of it. Part of a generation that refuses to stay buried under someone else's version of events. You are not lost. You were hidden, and now you're being found by yourself. They told you your story began in chains, that your history started with someone else's arrival, that you were just a chapter in someone else's book. But now, you know better, because you've seen the evidence, the DNA, the maps, The bones, the journals, the faces. And more importantly, you felt the truth in your blood. You weren't just brought here. You were already here, before the ships, before the flags, before the borders. Your people walked this land with names, languages, and purpose. You are not the product of brokenness. You are the legacy of greatness, buried, but never gone. And now it's time to remember, to reclaim, to rebuild what they tried to erase. Drop a comment below and tell us, where are you watching from? Are you part of the remembrance? Did your elders ever say, we got Indian in us? We want to hear your story. And if this shook something in you, hit that subscribe button.
Coffee. Follow me.